Are we going? Good. Well, good morning and welcome to our special council meeting workshop this morning on Thursday, June 16th. And, it is a tradition that we always open with prayer and the pledge. And so I'd like to do that this morning, and I don't have anyone arranged for prayer this morning. So who would like to? Somebody like to? Randy, thank you for opening us in prayer, and then we'll do the pledge.
Do I need to be on the mic? Well, I guess I am.
Yes.
Father, we just thank you for this morning that we have today to get together to discuss the matters of the city. I pray for clarity of thought, and I just pray for the direction you give us that we would really seek your guidance in all we do and all we say and how we represent you in this city. We give you praise for all of that. Thank you for the food this morning, and just pray that you'll bless it to the nourishment of our bodies as well. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Randy. Okay, let's do roll call.
Rodriguez. Brunner.
Here.
Jingu.
Here.
Reynolds. Here. Haverfield.
Here.
Bauer.
Here.
All present.
Well, this morning, our workshop is focused on the agenda. It says strategic planning exercises, but actually, we're going to call it a little different. And I think that the wording that we've identified is an implementation framework for the city of Nampa. And I really appreciate that because we've got a lot of plans in place for the city, and I look forward to being able to pull them all together and to look at how do we implement that, but also make sure that we're on the track that we need to be on. We have engaged, as the council knows, we budgeted for a strategic planning last year and this year. And last year we didn't get it done, and so this year we are moving forward. We have engaged Phil and Diane Kushlin, and I met Phil, I'm going to say 20 years ago. I think is almost 20 years ago, not quite, maybe 18 years ago, and had the privilege to get to know him a little bit while he was with CCDC, which was Capital City Development Corp, downtown Boise, when we both sat on the Downtown Boise Association board. So, and then Diane has a background with the Urban Land Institute. But in their retirement, they're working with McCall, they're working with Twin Falls, and have been for a number of years on their plans. And so they're going to be working on both a downtown, more of a strategic plan, pulling the stuff downtown together, and also working with us to help us pull together the numerous plans that we have, looking at what the goals that we currently have in place, which a lot has been delivered to them so that they could review it. There's more work to be done as we've just gotten started. But today's an opportunity for us to really talk about who we want to be. And so this is a discussion that Phil and Diane, Phil's going to lead, I believe, today. And it's really a discussion about how do we get there? And what do we need to have in place? What do we have in place? And so it's, and that's why we're not at the bench today. We're facing each other today so that we can just talk and visit with them and talk about where we go and how we're going to get there. And I really appreciate having both their expertise, but also the ability to focus, because we are so busy every day that sometimes those things that are really important, like making sure that we have a good, strong framework for how we move forward, and then operationally, because that's my role, is to ensure that we operationally implement. It gives us really that guidance. And then the other thing that I'm hoping that it will give us guidance on is our decision-making at the bench. Because when we're talking about budget and we're talking about land use issues, it really needs to align with what we've identified as our goal for where we're going to be as we look to the future. So anyway, your input is greatly appreciated. And so thank you for today. And then I do want to say on the budget side, we're under the budget that we had established of $30,000. right now, and typically a strategic plan is way, way, way more than this. And so I appreciate them working with us, lending their expertise to us. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Phil. And Phil, you can go for it today.
Does this work? Sounds like it.
It works, you
Great.
got it.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Thank you for joining us at this auspicious hour. I think I always like to get an early start on things. Again, my name is Phil Cushlan. I always like to let people know when I'm outside of Boise that I'm really from Owyhee County. My initial start in life was on a spud and sugar beet and wheat and alfalfa farm south of Homedale. So that's important in establishing one's credibility when you get out in the state. But anyway, I consider myself also a recovering city manager. I did that for a number of years in Oregon and Washington. And as the mayor indicated, I was the director of the Capital City Development Corporation for a dozen years in Boise. So pretty familiar with what happens in Idaho and how it works since having failed retirement. I've worked throughout the state, from Pocatello to Idaho Falls to Jerome, McCall, Sandpoint, Coeur d'Alene, Meridian, now Nampa. Again, dealing with a lot of different environments, but a lot of the same stuff. And when we got approached by the mayor and Cliff, we had a conversation with them about the concept of planning and how it is critical as a foundation for doing things. And we've all heard about the plan that's on the shelf, and nobody really is very proud of plans that are on the shelf. And so the mayor was interested in having us help her get her arms around all the things that the community and this council in the adoption of plans has indicated that they want to achieve in some planning horizon out there. And it's not to suggest you haven't made good strides on a lot of stuff that you've done, but I think the question out there is, can we do better and focus on implementation of what we say we want to achieve, as opposed to going out and revising our plans and doing more of them. So I think our goal here is to help you move the ball down the field, if you will, toward that goal that you've established in adopting the various plans that you've done. So the tasks that we've been asked to do is basically to sweep up all the things that have been before this body and have received your blessing in terms of its adoption. And I think primarily we looked initially at the comprehensive plan, which you've recently updated. Again, looking out to a planning horizon to 2040. You also, your transportation plan also has a similar horizon out there at 2040. And so, and also your wastewater plan is out at the same time. So since that is kind of where you focused already, we thought maybe that's the horizon that we ought to look at. But we think, often we think 40, 18 years out in the future, that's too far to think about. And so what we'd like you to do today is kind of help us kind of get our arms around where you want to go, and then we'll try to help figure out, working with the mayor, in terms of establishing a mechanism for you to, I guess, bite this thing off a little bit at a time so that you don't have to swallow $538 million of transportation improvements in one bite. So as you look at that number, 18 years doesn't look all that far out. So what we'd kind of like to do today, if you're willing to do it, is walk through a series of questions that we can receive the benefit of your dialogue. And clearly, I want to make sure that my intention here is not to make this a lecture. This is a conversation. And so hopefully we'll all have the ability to jump in and share our perspective, because there are no right answers in this stuff that we're doing here today. It's basically, you people are the ones with the election certificates. You are the ones who hold a unique role in this community. You are the ones who are in charge of the health, safety, and welfare, basically the police powers of the city of Nampa. And so you get to steer the ship. And so this is our opportunity, I think, to have you help us understand with some clarity what your priorities are and what you would like to see as an outcome in the next 20 years. So we're going to go through a bit of an exercise to have you tell us what you want to see out there in the future. Yep. Again, as I indicated, the horizon year, and that's the term from your transportation plan, is, we were going to key off of those dates that you've already adopted and looking at how we're going to approach this implementation framework. And so we started out looking at 2040 as that year of we're going to be working toward. And we got there because those are the dates that you've already stated in your individual plans. That was your horizon. And so I think it's important for us to understand that we're all on the same page there, is that 2040 year, 18 years out into the future, is that an appropriate planning horizon for us to be focusing on at this point in time, recognizing that 18 years seems like a long ways. Anybody want to weigh in on that?
You know what I might say for this meeting, we will, because it's a discussion, we'll get outside of the normal mayor, right? In a council meeting, I really appreciate the respect of, you defer to the mayor for the opportunity to speak. At this meeting, let's just speak, right? So that we don't have to be called upon or approved to speak out. And so, as Phil said, our comp plan is a 2040, 2040 is the plan. Our master plan for transportation is the same. And so the thought was we just use that as the year that we're looking toward as we answer the next questions that come up. But are you guys okay with that? Everybody agree?
Thank you for this opportunity. It is early in the morning, but your use of football metaphors are great. It just helps us to
Okay.
feel like we're going to get something accomplished.
Okay. As long as we don't get down to punt or clipping and that kind of stuff.
So is that the year that we get the touchdown?
Golf carts and basketball.
That's, the touchdown, or at least the 2-minute warning.
We can start scoring before that, though, right?
Yes, indeed, yeah. We don't have to wait to the end.
We're awake.
Okay, good.
That was great, I love that.
Good. All right. And again, we're talking about, what I'm going to ask you to do in a minute is describe a preferred future as you see Nampa in 2040. But what I wanted to do first, because thinking, God, that's way, way, way out there. Let's look back 18 years. That wasn't all that long ago. So tell me a little bit about what Nampa was like 18 years ago. 2004.
Yeah. It kind of feels like it was its own island. Like, I grew up in Boise, and we would you know, if we went to the Idaho Center for anything, it was like we were driving for forever, and then it just, you know, we were in at the
There were
at the
cows
Idaho
out
Center,
there.
and so it was just kind of its own isolated community. It felt like this was before GPS, and when we'd come out for games, like different sporting events, it was really hard to navigate because it was just felt like it was its own. Like it wasn't part of us, and so we didn't know how to navigate. So we had printed maps and
A printed map.
trying to get back on the freeway. But yeah, that's kind of what I remember of it.
Since then, and I think back of my own kids. Can you hear okay? Our oldest son going into the Navy, you know, the idea of moving out of Idaho was, a lot of the students were looking at for opportunity and excitement, but now they're all coming back because there's more opportunity and excitement here. So I think we've changed from that perspective. Nampa was not a destination. I think it's becoming more of that now than it was before.
Years ago, when you used to get off of Garrity, you'd look at it and go, wow, it's just an extension of Garden City. You know?
Yeah.
And now we look at Garrity, it gives a whole different impression of the city of Nampa. And businesses and hospitals and traffic, and it gives the impression that we have grown so much. But then when you go out to Franklin, you see the same thing, light industrial. You see restaurants, you see businesses. Then you go to Northside, again you get hit with businesses and industrial and storage units where there should have been a golf course. And then, of course, Karcher, where you see huge businesses. So what does that impress to those who are passing by? It's like, wow, this is amazing. Now compare that to Meridian, where you have corporate offices. What impression are they getting from Meridian to Nampa? Until you actually come into the city of Nampa, that's where it changes, because that's where things are different for the betterment of us. And since this council took over in 2017, we have changed the direction quite a bit. And it's a better location, it's a better geographically area that we can live in. So I think it's changed a lot.
Transportation is probably the main, how long it takes from what it used to 18 years ago. You know, you got to plan. I actually have to plan out how long I think it's going to take to get to the airport or whatever the case is. And it's mainly because of all the lights. And my wife, give you an example, my wife has worked in Eagle for 1 day a week for almost 20 years. What was taking her 20 minutes even 5 years ago is now taking her over 40 minutes, mainly because of all the lights on Shinden and different things. But and that's all because of development, subdivisions, and they want to get out on the roads, and they holler until they can get a light or something so they can access in a more expedient fashion. So probably that's the main difference I see is the time.
The ability to get around.
Time, yeah.
You know, I was just thinking, I think we've grown probably about 41,000 based on the census in the last 2 decades. So with the last 10 and the 10 before that. So about 41,000. What's interesting is that 18 years ago, we were a city with 4 exits. We're still a city with 4 exits, which is interesting because we even longer before that were a larger city with a larger footprint, but less dense. And so the density is what's come, that it's just where there's a lot more density and traffic. But it's interesting that the last decade, our growth was less than the 2 prior decades. But there's still a lot of growth. It'll be interesting to see where the next census takes us.
18 years ago, we were the second largest city in Idaho, just based on
Population.
numbers, so. I grew up in both. I had a little unique perspective because my dad died and my mom remarried a man from Meridian, but all my family was Nampa. So I was like living in Meridian, but every weekend I was going to Grandpa's house in Nampa. So I miss the old Nampa. It was, I'd say even like 30 years ago it was even better. If we could have got the crime down back then, it would have been best ever, because it was rural and small and business-friendly, a bunch of, you had one high school 30 years ago, so it has sure changed.
One thing that hasn't changed, though, is that there is still a sense, I went to the Nampa Chamber Luncheon yesterday, the sense of community is still here. Strong sense of community. And I think there are several things that contribute to that sense of community. The Chamber is one of them. The local businesses, the collaboration that takes place in our community, I think in a new campus makes a difference. But also the engagement of everyone. They're engaged still instead of disengaged. And that's a wonderful thing. And that hasn't changed. Because I think that we still are maintaining that sense of community even with the growth.
And that's a challenge.
The question is, how do we do that as we move forward?
Yeah, because people, just by sheer numbers, you don't know your neighbor like you used to. And maybe your next door neighbor you do, but the guy in the next block, maybe not so much. And I think that's a conscious kind of decision that we might want to talk about in terms of how do you maintain those things that we like. Do you have any you want to weigh in on? If that's the case,
From
then your
California.
perspective is absolutely critical, because we want to hear from people who haven't been wrapped in. Okay,
That's not the case, and, but it definitely, like Jacob said, I like the old rural feel of Nampa. I grew up on a farm in Emmett, and we would travel to Nampa, much like Natalie did, and it was the big city. And but it's so much different now than it was, and the traffic, I think, is one of the biggest sources of angst for myself. I mean, I live clear out off of 12th, and just getting down 12th takes 15 minutes a lot of times to get clear into town. So those kind of issues are things that I feel like 18 years ago we should have looked to this day and tried to alleviate some of that stuff. So looking ahead to 2040, I feel like our infrastructure is something that's very important that we need to look at, or we're going to have a big mess.
Okay, should we let's go to the next one, I guess? Let's go to look to the future. Okay, let's kind of play the flip side of that coin. And let's not worry about what it's going to take to make us get there. Because we each have a view of what the world would like to see. And that's 18 years out there. And it's not that far. Even though it seems like it's forever, it's not that far. But talk to me about your preferred future. What would you like to see when you walk out of your house or you walk down 2nd Street or Karcher Mall or my earliest memories in Nampa were the sugar beet plant. What do you want to see in a place that you still want to live? What's that look like? Because it's going to most likely be different than it is today. And you can drive that bus to a certain degree. So where do you want to take the bus?
Well, in our development, we need to hold higher standards to development and in industrial and, of course, residential. Because 20 years from now, what will that subdivision look like that we put in today? And is there any requirements that we hold them accountable for the beauty of our city, I guess? And in terms of streets and roads and city services, we got to be able to understand that if we don't do something now, we're going to be in a whole lot of trouble here soon. So can we afford to handle the growth and the development that's coming on at us? We haven't had that opportunity until now. That much growth is unbelievable. But how we're sustaining that growth is important, because like the mayor and I were talking yesterday, what we do today is going to show 20 years from now. And that worries me, because we need to hold others as well as our council accountable for the presence of our city 18 years from now. That's a
So what do you want, what do you want it to look like, though?
I want it to look like,
You want any more growth than what we have now?
well, I'd like to have, well, more growth, but have it at a level to where we can, it's not gonna look like the backside of an ugly neighborhood.
I'm pretty blunt. I don't want any more growth unless we have the infrastructure. And I realize without tax dollars and so on, it's a backwards, always has been backwards, I'm sure you.
Sure.
With all the consulting that you've done. But there's gonna have to be bypasses. Of course, we've talked about Highway 16 and going on the south side. But there's has, in my estimation, for us to grow, and I'm totally against sprawl at this time as far as, but there has to be bypasses on the west and the east side. And that's a lot of collaboration with Caldwell and so on, also with Meridian. And, but for us to move traffic and so on, especially where our land mass is on the south and to the north to a certain extent. But, and moving in from California, you know, traveling 30 minutes to get the freeway, they're used to that.
Yeah.
But still, that's not what I personally want. So until we can get that, I'm not in favor of too much growth other than infill at this point in time. And so in 2040, I guess I don't want to, if we can get that done somehow, and I don't know what the magic solution is, so.
It does
But
something to do
I'm
with
fine as long as we can move the traffic.
I would like an IKEA.
You like a what?
I want an IKEA. No.
What is it?
It's a shopping place, like furniture and,
Swedish. Some Swedish.
Where do you want that? Next door to you or what?
sure, Gateway. It's walking distance for me.
Carter Mall.
Yeah.
We've been residents of Napa for over 40 years. Raised your kids here, and seen changes at the university level, NNU upgrades, them going to a Division II level as far as in their athletics programs. So College of Western Idaho wasn't in existence before. There's other smaller colleges that are scattered throughout the city as well that provide educational opportunities, vocational at CWI, more fine arts at NNU. So we have an educational upper university level experience available for our kids. What's unique about Nampa to me is that we're still an agricultural based community, so there's still that grounded feel that people have. And I think those that have been here a while, you know, they appreciate that. And people that move here appreciate the quality of life and the people that they meet, because we're usually friendly to them. But I think what's unique about Nampa is, and I go back, it's more than 18 years ago, of driving from Nampa to Boise to work, and so into the sunrise, into the sunset, coming home at night. And a lot of people do that still, where their jobs are elsewhere. And as we've grown as a city, we've also looked at how we can create live-work opportunities here that we didn't have before. Like you say, Amalgamated was kind of one of the bigger employers here. Now, with the cooperation of the Nampa Development Corporation, we're looking at industrial areas for opportunities for IKEA to come and places like that will offer jobs and offer people that live here an opportunity to work here and not have to go clear to Boise and strain the interstate, which Darrell's talking about. Because again, 30 years ago, it was a 2-lane highway. Now it's a lot more than that. It's still insufficient. So, but Meridian's unique. They're a bedroom community. They do have some office developments along the freeway that is kind of setting them apart a little bit, but they have very little industrial. We do. So that's what I think gives us an opportunity, a leg up, as far as for proper growth and planning. The downtown core is going to be a tough egg. to crack because access to the downtown core, through whether it's Garrity or up north side, you know, it's just not, it's not the corridor of our, you know, bringing people in that they're going to want to come to downtown naturally. They're just going to have a destination that they want to go find. So that challenge is going to be unique on how we create traffic that's into downtown, but yet bypassing with the beat trucks and those things around the core so that we're not putting a lot more stress on already overstressed roads in like 12th Avenue and the pivot block and those things. And there's, as you dig into this, you're going to find a lot of unique things that we have here that probably improperly planned to begin with, that now we're dealing with, and how do we adapt to what we have. Indian Creek has never been explored to its full potential. You know, there's just opportunities that are maybe diamonds in the rough, but it's just a matter of dollars available and already overtaxed. 8 years ago, we had the highest levy rate in the state. That's not true today. We've really worked hard to get the levy rate down, but now property values have gone back up. So people aren't enjoying a difference in their what they're paying in taxes, but they can sell their home for a mint where they couldn't get out of their home before for what they owed in it. So I'm talking too much.
No.
But I love the football metaphors.
You know,
I'm hoping in 18 years, we can, and going back to your last question, what and you couldn't pay me enough money to live in Meridian because Nampa is so unique and special to me. We have more small businesses, more unique restaurants that are small business owners. It's not this, you know, we don't have all these, and personally, I don't like some of the urban renewal projects we've done that brought in Costco, brought in all these businesses. That's what exploded everything. So I'm hoping in 18 years that we really look at the past and what made Nampa unique was the community, the small businesses, the farmers, and we try to preserve some of that going forward, where we really try to make it a unique special, where we keep having those restaurants, those small businesses, those resto cleans, those companies here that make Nampa great, because we have so many of them that Meridian don't have. And so that's kind of my hope, that every decision we make, we look at, hey, let's keep Nampa as less corporate as possible, keep it homegrown, small business, you know, that type of feeling. I think we can do that. I don't think we can stop growth. I don't think it's government's responsibility to stop growth, but hopefully we can, you know, make it the right type of growth that we want.
You know, yesterday I got a dose of reality. My wife's daughter is from Tennessee. That's where she lives. And she moved 10 years ago. And so she said, they're here now. And they said, well, we want to go to downtown. And I'm thinking, yeah, let's go downtown. This is going to be cool because you're going to enjoy it because we've done a good job downtown. She got downtown, she went, oh my God, it hasn't changed. It's the same thing, only you have 2 restaurants and a beer joint. And I went, yikes. We need to change that.
What would you like to see downtown?
Oh, you don't want to ask me that, man. I'll tell you.
Yes,
all
I
day
do
long.
want to ask you that.
Retail downtown.
Yes.
We need retail, we need restaurants that are open for lunch. We need local businesses that are open, that you can go shop in and walk through, right? That there's something to purchase, but there's very little, there's only a couple places open for lunch. And we've got our mix, I'll just be really candid, the mix of bars to restaurants, way out of balance. And our young people are saying, we want a place to go hang out. They can't hang out in our downtown because everything's over 18.
Yeah.
Almost everything is over 18. There isn't even a place for them to go, hardly. So they go to the Village, and what they've asked, they said, could we have someplace like the Village? We want someplace we can sit outside and get together and hang out and talk, and there's very few places. Flying In is a place that a lot of young people go, but we are very limited. But as you work with downtown, and you probably kind of know the why on that, that's not something that we can fix easily. And there will be separate meetings on downtown. So when I go there, we won't stay there long because maybe in the downtown discussion, this group could be invited also to give input in the downtown piece. And we can talk, maybe it's up to you today, but.
Yeah, I think we can if, I think we should, because my opinion is that downtown is such a critical piece of your identity. It is your history, and in your history obviously is your future. And, you know, a lot of places, you know, in Boise, we tried to tear it all down, and fortunately, we wised up and stopped. And so, you know, I think there are some key aspects that, you know, the public entities can intervene to maybe create some catalysts, certainly through, you know, the NDC process and others, that things can happen, but, you know, really the investment comes from the private sector. You know, those are the people who make the decisions that actually drive that train. And so I think we need to, well, I guess, we can always, we're much more likely to get people to do what we want if we tell them what it is. And so maybe here's our opportunity to kind of paint that picture through this process and through the downtown focus in terms of what do you want that to be? Do you want it to be just like it is now? I'm hearing maybe not. The whole question of housing downtown. You've got the one project that's going on over by Riley's Auto Parts. That's kind of a different thing than you've had in the past. Is that something you want to encourage? So you don't like sprawl. Well, everybody hates sprawl and nobody likes density either. And so how do you walk that balance beam? And so, and the market's going to determine what's going to be achievable in downtown Nampa. But I think having you talk about what you want to see, one of the things that I've noted is your public spaces downtown are small and dispersed. You know, you don't really have that large gathering spot that is that place to go, is that place where maybe you don't live here, but you see your neighbor from 3 blocks away down there too. And oh, by the way, I've been meaning to talk to you about kind of interaction that those common spaces kind of help people maintain that familiarity with each other over time. And, you know, that is something that a public response can help happen. And I think you can't make it happen, but certainly maybe you can remove some barriers that act against that. So I'm particularly interested in your vision for downtown and certainly the other parts of town as well, but I think that is a critical piece of the puzzle.
If I may ask a question, because I don't have a whole lot of answers. So Boise, you've spent a lot of time in Boise. Boise, there's no question, they don't have the village there, but it is, the young people are there. My son lives in Boise, and they love it down there, and so it's vibrant. But as you go through Boise, my understanding is there's a lot of residents, people who are actually living downtown or close to town. So in your estimation, and we are talking about this one project across from the library, of course, and so to me, people, for incentivizing a private small business to feel like they can make the dollar, they can make the profit, they want people close.
Yep.
So is that so, I mean, and of course, Boise, I realize they have some residents over businesses. So you have they have those type of, you know, as far as a mixed use type. So is it for a downtown to be vibrant, to me, people have to have customers.
Yeah, and I think what we found is, you know, the living units in downtown are not ranch-style houses stacked up. They are different living environments. They're small, and often that your living room is 8th Street. And that's where you spend time, and you have a number of people within walking distance to, you know, some shopping. You can always use more downtown Boise, but certainly all the food and beverage stuff is within walking distance to a growing number of thousands of people. And, you know, I did a housing study in 2005 where it said that, you know, if we're going to be like, you know, other successful downtowns, we're going to need 1,500 housing units downtown Boise. People say, you gotta be nuts. Says, nobody wants to live in downtown Boise, so get out of here. And so, well, okay, let's do a market study for Boise. And so we had Clearwater Research come in and do a specific market study. And they says, no, it's 5,000 units that you need. And so then there was this little thing called the recession came along. I don't know if you noticed that. But anyway, that kind of slowed things down in terms of the housing market. And so they weathered that. And so when that came back about 2011, all of a sudden there was this now big push toward housing, and there are several thousand units either planned or under construction now. So that's been a fundamental change. Sorry, I digress. No, I'm sorry.
Sorry, finance, I'm the finance geek, sorry, I'm working on my voice here. I want to just add a kind of a comment about the infrastructure. Darrell, Councilman Bruner talked about it, Councilman Rodriguez talked about it, in relation to growth, in relation to investment in the city. The growth in new construction we have right now pays for the increase in public safety needs. It pays for, every year, the new construction pays for the new vehicles we buy for the police and for the central services and general government. If you don't have that new construction, like if you, I don't have an opinion here, but I say if you deem that you need to slow down growth, that's a decision that you would make as a council. The financial consequence would be you will lose some of that money that pays for our current year growth. Now, you have three basic mechanisms for revenue. You've got the 3% limit, you've got the new construction, and then you've got what shared revenues do with the state. Shared revenues are volatile. They can be great, and they have been great. They can go down as quickly as they go up. So relying on them is problematic. Not terrible, but problematic. So if you take the new construction and say, we determine as a city council that we want to slow the growth because that's best for our long-term community, that's a perfect decision. Recognize that you still have costs increasing for your existing infrastructure, let alone paying for any delayed growth impact. So how do you fund that? How do you fund that growth? Well, you've got the 3%, that's one aspect, but we've never been willing to take that. So if you slow down the new construction and you choose to limit the 3%, you might end up in a situation where you are unable to pay for the growth in central services, needs, or safety. Might. It's kind of hard to say because I don't know what shared revenues will do. But shared revenues, while they have been great, if they go down and we had a very bad recession and they dropped by a couple $2 million a year, where do I fund that? So all I'm saying is the commentaries recognize that there is a balance and an impact to each decision, a financial balance and an impact to each decision. And you've talked about what the city wants to look at in 2040. Keep aware that as you make decisions, there is a community growth impact and a very visceral financial impact to what you do and how we pay for the city's needs.
Well, and I think that's true. And which of those legs of the stool do you actually control? Because you're basically at the end of the dog's tail on the state shared revenues. You get to control a certain amount of your property tax resource income, but the legislature a couple years ago gave us a big hand in helping us by limiting that whole thing to 8%, so much of the new growth you can't access anyway. I think as you look out, we need to kind of understand which of those factors can we actually control around this table. Mayor?
I appreciate Doug's comments, and what it reminded me of is that one of the things that Nampa was known for was really its level of poverty. We are not a wealthy community. And we'll see, and Tom has an item on the council agenda this coming Monday, and we talked about it briefly yesterday,
because it was a change in the match on a grant. And because of the recent census, we actually have a larger match because our poverty levels have reduced. So we don't have as much poverty right now, which is good news. But we've been known for our poverty and not being wealthy. And so what I would like to see in 18 years is that we're a well-planned community, that we're not known for our poverty, that we have a mix of business, residential, and recreation. And, you know, it's the old adage of, you know, we hear it, we want to be a community where we live, work, and play. But one of our goals, at least my goal coming in, is that we're a city, a full-service city, that you can actually live here, shop here, and work here, which means you have to have that mix of business and residential. Anyway, and that we still maintain our sense of community. So what I would like to see, though, is a well-planned community. And one of I think our greatest challenges is that we're so different from Meridian in that Meridian, good grief, in the 90s, I think had 13,000 people there. That's the sign, and maybe it was before that, I don't remember, but it's about 13,000. It was small. Well, you look at how fast they have grown, but they've grown in all new ground, right? Because that was all farm ground there. They were just a very small city infrastructure. During that same time frame, we had our 4 exits. So we already were a larger community, so we don't have the same privilege of designing like they have been able to design their communities, because we've got a lot, we're infilling a lot. But we were so much larger, so we have different constraints. And I know for me, I've been a little bit concerned with the amount of industrial, and that's why I strongly encourage us to look at our design standards for industry, our industrial buildings, because if we're not careful, I think we could be a slum in 40 years or in 20 years. If we're not careful in how we design and just let people do what they want to do here, then we could look really bad in 20 years. And the one thing that I heard said, and I haven't forgotten, is that, you know, every subdivision we approve, everything that we approve, it's going to be there 50 years, 100 years from now. You don't quickly scrape that. So whatever we're designing from a design standard and land use today is defining us in 18 years. And so for me, I'm concerned about what we're going to look like, and then do we have the proper mix that we need, housing to business and business mix. We don't control, though, the business mix side. It's up to the private sector to come in, but we need to give them a landscape to come in too. And so what does that look like? And when I say landscape, I'm not talking just a physical landscape to come into, but also the business culture and ordinances and all that kind of stuff. So.
Commercial side, you kind of set a bar, and the next person in has to look as good as the one before them, or they're at a competitive disadvantage. And so I think you have a role in those kinds of conversations in terms of looking down the long term, is how's this thing gonna wear over time? And I think, you know, a lot of places I've seen is any growth, we'll take it. We don't care what you put up. I think that kind of sets a tone that defines what the community looks like in 5, 10, 20 years. So, I think you get to decide what your standards are going to be, but I think it's a conversation that probably is a good thing to have.
My dings, and I appreciate Rick, he's keeping me up to date on numbers. Meridian had 9,596 in 1990. So look at that. So in 1990, for us, I think we were 51,000. My phone just closed, but I think we were 51,000 in 90. Let me look. Yeah, in 90, we were 28,000. Mm-hmm. In 2000, so just 20 years ago, we were 51. So we've doubled our population in 20 years. And Rick, thank you.
They were 1A or 2A when you played basketball?
But I played in Boise.
I know, but they weren't even like you were 1A and they were, sorry, it was reversed back then, so they were.
You're talking Meridian?
Yeah.
Meridian was the same. in the 70s.
Or 1A?
Nampa was in the same. Yeah, there was only one school, so that's why they had enough population. Whereas Boise had Bishop Kelly and Boise High and Bora and Capital.
I just wanted to chime in on the design change, because I think that's an important thing. And I've done some work in Garden City, and Garden City decided they wanted design guidelines. Garden City. And, you know, it was really tough initially because developers would come in and say, I've always created this, you know, vanilla-looking storage facility. Why, they're all down this street, and I'm just going to add to what's already down the street. And the city said, no, we're making a change. And they stuck by their guns. And it's a little bit hard to see if you just drive down Chinden, but they have made some differences. So it can be done.
Right here, I think one of the reasons to go through this process is to kind of articulate where you're going, and so that you can maintain some consistency and your eye on the goal, if you will, because we know that on a weekly basis, there's going to be a rabbit run through the room, and all of a sudden, we chase the rabbit. We forget about what our priorities are. And all of a sudden, the rabbit's the priority. And doing this job, we can at least kind of give ourselves some discipline to say, well, maybe the rabbit is important today, but what does that do to what we said we really wanted to do on an annual basis or on a 5-year basis in terms of moving the ball down the field? And so I think that's part of the reason that I think we want to kind of put together this framework, is that we can all kind of understand that there's 100 yards on this field and that there are yard markers and things like that, so that all of a sudden we're not trying to dribble the football, that we understand that the game is this and that's where we're going to focus, and we need a reason to change focus on a short-term basis. And that's kind of the discipline that I think these kinds of processes bring to the system, so that the plans that you've spent good money on, you have a reasonably decent chance of getting there. So I think that's the important part, and it's recognizing that it's going to take time and consistency and patience to move through this process to get to that preferred future that you've defined.
I was just going to follow up on that too. I've listened to some of the things that are being said. I try not to cringe when we talk about controlling growth to a point where we don't have growth, because that's the driver of our community. There's so many businesses like mine that are dependent on the construction practice, and whether it's selling real estate or bank loans or purchasing lumber from Lowe's, developers and contractors, there's a lot of people that are involved in that trade. So it's important that we don't just put down blanket thoughts like that can come across as being, you know, a roadblock to proper growth. But we have to be disciplined in how we approach these things too, and be smart that the sense of place that we're trying to maintain and or create is one that is going to take some time. It's going to take some outside interest of dollars coming into our community that they want to choose to develop here something that's special that they are proud of, and they're going to get a return on their investment. So that's difficult. But as you look at, a great example is Manhattan Island. There was a point in time where it was just farmland too, but it was a set geographical area bounded by water. It was not going to get any bigger, so it went vertical. And as you see communities go more vertical, it's to not have the sprawl into farmland that is food source, but also it's proper growth in a way that works. And so as we look at the growth of our downtown, potentially, maybe we have to start looking more closely at pedestrian traffic, bus traffic, you know, hate to say it, but the scooter bikes, things, you know, that keep people out of their cars and they want to come down and feel safe, and that's that sense of place that the mayor's talked about. Eliminate as many roundabouts as you can. That's for Darrell's purpose.
A bunch of us, Boise Chamber took a group, they had to do these inner city visits. We went to Austin, Texas. That's a good thing to do, by the way. And one of the things we heard over and over in Austin is for prior 20 or 25 years, the mantra was, if we don't build it, they won't come. So they didn't build it. Well, you know, they came anyway. And so the city of Austin was way, way, way behind the curve in terms of infrastructure development, and traffic was just awful, and their utility systems were, you know, in crisis. And so, you know, while we might want to suggest that all those people who weren't born here go back to where they came from, I got to go back to Homedale, is something that isn't really a real circumstance in the environment that we are in. You know, if they don't come here, they're going to go to Acuna, or they're going to go to unincorporated Canyon County, or they're going to go to Star, or they're going to go to Middleton. And they're going to come here anyway. And so while we struggle with that sometimes, there is a certain level of inevitability that it might be a tsunami, but we better get our boat in gear so we understand what it's going to look like.
We're in a unique time. We're seeing a lot of improvements to our wastewater treatment facilities, which is spurring the ability for businesses to come in and partner with our wastewater treatment plant for biograde or, you know, biosolid. There's just things that they can do to work together. So, I mean, that's an opportunity that we see happening, and it's already happening. But I think originally, I don't know, Tom's not here, is he? Oh, okay. I believe our city, when the original founding fathers looked at a population of about 200,000 people, is what they were kind of planning for with the breaking of the domestic and the irrigation system, so that we wouldn't be taxing, like Boise has, you know, using potable water for watering their lawns. We don't have that problem. So they were advanced in their thoughts, which was great, but we were an agricultural-based community again, so they were trying to divert that irrigation water from Lucky Peak through and utilized it for farm ground. So we've seen a lot of changes, but the original plan was to have growth up to at least 200,000 people, and we're well on our way there. But as we grow, again, if we can maintain the sense of place, maintain the quality of life through the opportunity to live, work, and play here, as the mayor mentioned, and to worship. You know, that's another aspect of our community I think that makes us unique, is that in God we trust is over our city, whatever you would call that plaque. But it's important for us to know where our roots are. And so as we do that, and we look at the opportunities, maybe like opening up Indian Creek north of the track line, creating an opportunity to bring pedestrian traffic over the railroad track there into maybe downtown. I mean, I've had developers in my office talking about that. You know, can we get some people together to buy up this ground that's worth nothing, you know, because it's just FEMA had, their maps were such that it was all underwater. Now they're not. That's changed. The FEMA map has changed. So there is opportunities for developers, but it's, again, sharing that vision of this is what you could possibly do here. Look what Caldwell did with Indian Creek. Maybe create housing communities, retail, and service-related business in North Nampa that's not there today. Ability to shop there would be opened up, but it's a vision. And the Nampa Development Corporation, that's a part of, I think, what we could possibly partner with. And but we have a limited life left in our current urban renewal plan. So anyway, and that was, again, it can be misused.
Sure.
And it was in the past. So for the last 8 years, Darrell and I have served on the NDC board, and we've worked hard to try to correct some of the spending that was, you know, mismanaged, maybe misused. Things were done in advance of other things so that we couldn't create the economic development that would come off of an urban renewal area. Now we're finally there. We're able to do that, and we're seeing tremendous benefits that will be long-lasting for our city. So it's been well worth our time being on that board. But with the wastewater treatment upgrades, when that's all said and done, it's going to be something that we'll be able to then use with the water reuse, the biosolids. There's going to be some things that possibly we'll be able to see some benefit as a city, as a return on our investment That then goes back to the taxpayer.
You know, as you were talking, one thing that we haven't talked about that goes along with that is stewardship. So being good stewards of the assets, in 18 years, when you look at the reuse, working with, like, the recycling of our biosolids, so, and the fact that there was the vision many years ago to separate, as you just said, our groundwater aquifer is not being used for irrigation except for in a few places where it needs to be. We had the mindset early on, some time ago, and I don't know how long ago that was, to do pressurized irrigation. And so we're continuing to build on that and then tying it in to our recycled water. And so I guess in 18 years, I want to see that we're continuing that track and that we're innovative. As a city, that we're an innovative city, and that's something we talk about to the directors all the time, is that we're innovative and we're thinking ahead. And we have done that. And we're not necessarily known for that, but I think that there, in a lot of ways, we have done that. And so that's exciting, and that's what I would like in Nampa in 18 years, to be seen as a city that's innovative, which is really about stewardship, right, of our resources. And then I'm going to add, we don't want to forget about safety, because we have our tagline, safe and healthy community. And I like to say where people live life abundantly. And so the safety side of where are we going to be in 18 years? So, but we can go back, go ahead.
Yeah, I think on that point, being innovative assumes a certain amount of risk tolerance and the tolerance to fail. Because if I can switch to baseball,
Certainly.
if you hit 300 in the major leagues, you know, they put you in the Hall of Fame. That's a 70% failure rate. And in the public sector, we don't tolerate failure much because it's embarrassing and it all happens in public and people shout at us and bug you in the grocery store. So how do you create an environment where innovation is a value and people aren't afraid to take that extra step because the floor might cave out from under them? And you know, that's not an easy thing to establish, but I think, you know, if you can look at your past and that innovation has got you to a place where you like to be in certain aspects, how do you make sure that that's one of those factors that that you carry into the future? Yeah?
Tom, I think, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the innovation piece. So Mayor's done an excellent job of creating an environment for us to be innovative, and I really appreciate that. I just want to say that we are known for innovation in Nampa, and that's something to be proud of. I mean, we're leading the state in the reuse and the reuse of our water and our water resources, and it's being recognized across the state. And you know, we've been attending the Water Resource Board meetings, talking to them, and they've been impressed with our projects and our drought task force, and also all the work that we've been doing on the transportation side, on the federal side for getting additional funds. We're, you know, a lot of innovation there and recognition across the state. So I want to just take a minute to thank Mayor for allowing us to have that environment to do these things, and we really appreciate it.
It takes a team, and I appreciate your comments on that, because in the public sector, it is a risk, and it's a little scary, and it's a really good point. So what is our appetite for that risk? But I tell you what it does take is it takes time. Because it's taken a lot of time for Tom on the highway stuff, the drought task force, but we were the leaders in going out on that, and then everybody, many municipalities have jumped on board because we took the lead on it, which Tom did in organizing that. But even in changing a state statute and dealing with the highway distribution formulas, it's coming out of Nampa, but it takes time. It takes a lot of time to focus, but our livelihood is dependent upon it. As a city, the fact to get transportation funding, because we are the largest, I still like to say, and it's true, we're the largest full-service city in the state of Idaho. Even though the fire district stepped out, because we do all of it. And if we're not innovative, we can't sustain and we can't provide the services to the citizens. So, anyway.
Can I just say one thing really quick about design? Bounce back to that really quick. I have a buddy on Eagle City Council that I like to just pick her brain and just get different perspectives. And when it comes to design, because a lot of times when we look at how we want a subdivision to look in 18 years from now, some of these subdivisions are going to look like cardboard, you know, and that's kind of the fault of our own in a sense. And so one thing that she said that they do is because there's developers that are developing here and they're developing lower end quality than they're doing in Eagle. It's same developer. And she said that they set their expectations higher. They require them to meet a higher expectation. And she said one thing that they do in their council meetings is they do require them to bring samples of products, so a little piece of siding or some rock or, you know, color schemes or whatever, and they have to physically, she says they'll pass them around and they'll physically touch them and they're like, I don't know, this doesn't really feel great quality. I want a higher end product. Come back next meeting and show us something else. And she says they're not afraid to do that. And so I think that maybe that's something that we need to look at is changing how we do those approval processes and what we are requiring developers to do.
I'll say that the Design Review Commission already has that requirement as a part of their submittal process. So
Yeah, I'm sure
it's
they
at a
do,
different
yeah.
level. The city council in Eagle is their design review board.
Oh, they are, okay. Yeah.
The only thing is, I'm wondering if our standards are high enough. And so we're looking at industrial, but I think we need to not be afraid to raise our standards. Because if we don't, right now, we don't need growth to happen for growth, right? We need the right kind of growth. And if we raise our standards, like for us, we wouldn't have the time to do that, but I think that we need to set the standard higher. And we've got a meeting at noon with developers, but many of the developers I've talked to have just said, just tell us what you want. If we will set the standard, that isn't a ridiculous standard, right? But we can set the standard, but we need to be setting a higher standard instead of a low standard. And I think Nampa for years has set a low standard, which has gotten us what we've gotten. And so I think it's time that we set a higher standard, especially right now when we don't need to just be growing, right? So if we lose something because we set a high standard, I don't know that that's all bad. I don't think we want to do like Middleton just, excuse me, did a moratorium. Star is cutting back on their development, and it's because of 389 and the problems, right, and the impact it's having. I don't see us necessarily wanting to do that, but if we raise the bar of our standards, we're not going to have everybody flocking here because we're the cheap place to come in and do business. It's kind of like, you know, and I said it on one of the subdivisions some time ago, and I said, Nampa deserves better than this. And I think we do. And so I like the idea of raising our standards.
I'll state from an architectural perspective that when I work with a developer, it's what are the goalposts? Back to the football metaphor.
Set them.
You know, don't keep moving the goalpost. If we know what it is, we can design to that standard, that's what we'll design to, because that's what we look for is the guardrails that we need to work within. It can be too onerous in certain areas. Eagle's a great example of one that's really difficult to get anything through, worse than Seattle that I've, you know, as far as areas. So you don't want to be having that reputation in a sense, because developers will just say, no, I'm going to move to an area where I think we're going to be appreciated more. So they kind of work around the edges. But I think it's important that, well, in Boise, I'm going to date myself, back when I was a young architect working in downtown Boise, and we had the RUDAT study. That was probably before you.
That basically set the stage for what happened.
So we were involved with very similar conditions in downtown Boise that we have in Nampa, where they looked at the road systems, creating the one-ways, creating the parking structures, getting rid of the homes downtown and looking more at the mix of what they wanted to have the downtown to be more of an entertainment core and less of a residential first, you know, kind of a mix match thing. But once they started going with that and Boise State grew in prominence, we saw more entertainment going down. Quest Arena, Boise State's Taco Bell. I mean, there was a lot of things, even on campus with the Morrison Center. It became more of a destination at night. And so people would come and work during the day, go home at night outside, and then come back in for entertainment. That's kind of what they looked at doing. But it took time, and it took, a discipline.
It's a very good point, because I think one thing that developers need more than anything else is certainty. Let me know what I need to do, and I can work around that, and I can meet your standard if I know early enough what your standard is, rather than come up and surprise me at the end of the process, so the architect gets to go back and start over again. So it's, again, you can't be cavalier about it in terms of what your standards are, but there's probably room between where you are and where, which is too much, that, you get to decide what that level is, but it's not nothing.
Couple statements, if I may, and then mainly questions, and then I'll come back to Doug just a little bit. Nampa, for a long, long time, I'm not going to go into the builders' names or whatever, but they were building starter homes for years. And those have mainly turned, in my estimation, have turned into rentals over time. So I think that's what we're talking about. The other thing is you're going to get pressure from both sides. We got to decide what type of city we want to be. Thing is, price of homes right now for any young person coming out to purchase a home is almost impossible. I realize with the higher interest rates and so on, there'll be fluctuations. So we're getting pressure for the new terminology now is workforce housing rather than affordable housing.
Right.
And so do we decide we become a community of that? Or do we decide that we have certain standards where, because the developer is going to pass on the price to the consumer?
Or he's not going to do it.
That's just economics 101. So that's going to happen. So so do you do a mix of that or whatever? So I'm just saying, and I'm not one way or the other. Yes, I have some leanings, but we have to decide as far as, to me, the city in 2040, what we want to look like. Do we want to look more like workforce housing, or do we want to look more like higher end housing? Yeah.
We need a mix
Yeah,
of housing.
but what that is, and the other thing, Doug, what I was going to say is, to me, when you say, yes, we have to pay, but what pays most? What type of growth development pays us most from a tax standpoint to be able to afford? Is it residential or industry?
It's a fairly complex answer, but I think we can safely assume that in the current structure of our tax system, residential are bearing the greatest burden of the tax component. Let me give you the example we've used in the past. 5 years ago, our commercial properties at the airport generated about $120,000 of tax revenue. Now those are down to about $85,000 of tax revenue. We haven't sold any, lost any. We're just getting less per unit because the tax burden is being shifted to the residential side. The decrease is coming on the commercial and agriculture. So while we may not be getting as much per unit off the residential, most of the tax burden is being borne by the residential.
But new
we know that.
construction,
Yeah.
so new construction though,
Right.
it
Yeah.
used to be that you would look for a new, let's say an Amazon, that was gonna, which we didn't recruit Amazon, but they came, right? So when Amazon came in, and our goal was, let's bring in good paying jobs, which those are, average, but like when I came in as mayor, and what I thought would make a good, proper balance in our community was to recruit strong businesses that provided a good wage, to get the wage up, right? But today, if we have a new business come in, the tax revenue we're gonna receive off of that new construction has dropped considerably because of the balance in the tax mix. So I was writing some notes earlier about what's difficult, and you mentioned it, what's out of our control, right? It's a legislative issue, and then you've got Canyon County land use issues where the sprawl's happening all around us, even though we're not supposed to be sprawling, but it's being approved. And then we're dealing with it because we don't have connectivity, we don't have sidewalks, they don't adhere to our standards, but they're approving stuff right outside of our boundaries, which makes it really, really difficult. And then you've got the federal side of certain things. The good news on the federal side is the FEMA floodplain for Indian Creek changed last week. And getting that notification of the work that was done by our team to correct that is massive for North Nampa, which is also an opportunity zone. So, but anyway, I'm kind of sidebarring off of.
But you bring up a very valid point, Mayor. It's very complex because you do need a commercial base. You've got to have that. that provides income for people that stay here. In the environment now, we're trying to encourage people, get a job in Nampa, don't drive to Boise and incur the $6 a gallon per gas cost, and give yourself a personal raise just by staying in Nampa. So you need a commercial base. So it's not as simple as saying which gives the most taxes. It's which provides the most balance. And I don't know that I have the expertise to fully answer that question, but it is a reality.
Yeah, I think what nationally the studies show that low-density development of any kind really doesn't pay for itself in terms of the infrastructure you have to put there and the services you have to provide over the long haul. It doesn't really produce the tax revenue sufficient to pay for it, so you need the commercial side to fill up the bucket. So how long can you tolerate that balance, and what is the balance? And so it's a fiscal equation. And as the mayor indicated, none of this is, well, not all of it, but some of it is decisions made here, but a lot of it comes in over the transom from somebody else. And you're going to hear me talk through this process about partnerships, because you don't have the legal authority, the money, the political horsepower, the patience to do everything that's going to need to be done to get you down here to 2040. And so much of what you're going to need to do is identify who your partners are and then figure out strategies to empower them to help you get to where you want to go, rather than have doing everything yourself. And so I think it's a different set of skills often than we are taught. You grow up, you stand on your own 2 feet, you make your own decisions, and you make things happen. Well, in this world, you can make some things happen, but you can't make it all happen. And so how do you identify those partners, sell the vision to the partners, and then help them help you?
I have a question.
Please.
And this is partially for Doug and also you. I was talking to a gentleman the other day, and he said this to me, and I couldn't answer that. Well, I could, but I thought, wow. The more we bring businesses into Nampa, the more the tax burden to the homeowner because of our tax structure. I mean, what do you think?
Again, it comes back to a complex issue. We are seeing a shifting in burden, but by bringing the commercial in, you're adding that base to it, keep people employed in Nampa.
Yeah, I agree.
And so that adds to the personal taxes they pay and the sales taxes they purchase, and that helps us.
And I think the other point in that equation is the homeowner's property tax exemption, because you have a significant percentage of your housing stock has a 50% reduction in their assessed value. So that amount of tax capacity just went away. And so the renter doesn't have that benefit because the renter doesn't have the tax exemption. So they're actually paying a higher percentage of the tax burden than an owner does. And that's a state determination that that's what we should be doing. Then there was the index issue, and then they took the index off, and now it's 125, and who knows what's going to happen in the future. But in understanding the residential tax burden, there are strategies at play that tend to artificially push that down. Well, it doesn't go away. The city doesn't pay that bill. Somebody else does, because the assessed value demand goes to someplace else. And so the industrial and commercial and rental aspects of the market picks up what the resident, the owner occupied residence doesn't pay. So it's, as Doug said, it is a hugely complex issue. And one thing I've learned over my 50-some years talking about this stuff is there aren't 8 people in town who understand the Idaho property tax system very well. Alan Dornfest can do it, but that's about it, because it doesn't function in the way that most people think it does. You've got a PhD in it now, but it's a very difficult thing to understand.
Well, that was a tough answer. I mean, that was a tough answer, but it complicated as hell is what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And everybody wants things to be simple, and quick. You stand in front of the microwave and say, hurry up. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. we need to move on? We've kind of talked about this, you guys are playing here, but again, looking out into the future, what are those changes that you see, both good and bad, so that we can try to focus how we can encourage the good stuff you want to see happening, and how we might develop strategies for basically avoiding some of the things you want to have not happen. You're looking out 18 years, and what's going to happen that's going to shiver your timbers, and which are those things that you look forward to?
So just throwing out the net, see what sticks, I guess, or what we catch. If a vision is uniform as far as on this council with our development staff and economic, as far as emphasis on trying to partner with industry and the development community, what could we possibly cast out there that they might bite on would be, now that the FEMA maps have been adjusted, the potential for ground being purchased at a reasonable value, because right now, ground anywhere else is not reasonable in value, it's inflated. So the potential for development in an area that's been considered a food desert north of the interstate, bounded by 16th and 11th and Garrity, if that area could be a vision cast that people could get in on, even 11th Avenue North, well, not north, but just 11th Avenue, Paul's closed because they were in an area where they were a floodplain, so insurance rates were higher. I mean, there's things that can happen. I think that would help the downtown core maybe thrive more with the opening of Indian Creek, but again, that's developer dollars. That's not city dollars that are going towards that, in my mind. So how do we encourage outside development to come in and see that vision and help us accomplish something that would be a definite improvement for our community over the years to come?
Well, you mentioned the RUDAT study.
Yeah.
And that was determinative in terms of people who came in and did the picture. Because, in '85, they brought in ZGF out of Portland, and they developed this master plan for downtown. And if you look at that plan, which was done in '85, that's what was built. And the Urban Renewal Agency in that point actually paid for that. But a public entity stood up and says, that's what we want. And it took a long, long time and a lot of money from both public and private investment to make that happen. But there was consistency over the term in saying, yeah, that's still the vision. And so I think that's a point where maybe you can't go out there and build grocery stores, but you can maybe paint a picture that suggests why that's important and how, are there mechanisms to support it, some through NDC and others. So it's not a hopeless task. And I think basically saying where you want to go is the first step.
For the council's benefit, the RUDAT study, it's Rural Urban Development. I can't remember what all the acronym stands for, but it's Rural Urban Development Planning.
The Design Assistance Team.
Design Assistance, where the American Institute of Architects came in and brought together a charrette process where local architects, local developers, the CCDC, I think at that point, all came together to brainstorm. Documents were created. It was over a 5-day span. I mean, it didn't take long for it to happen. I worked for ZGA at the architects at that time. So ZGF, when they came in, it was like, wow, that's kind of cool. The acronyms are similar, but they're a big firm. And anyway, that helped set the stage for the changes in downtown Boise at that time. Because again, it was a hodgepodge downtown, and they came up with the concentric rings of historic districts, I think after that. And so the one-ways were created, the the vertical nature of things started taking off at that point. They had in Boise, the Capitol Corridor between the State House and the depot was meant to be something that was to be maintained. There was a lot of aggravation when the bank was built, which created a vertical element that, it should have been set back a little bit more. But that's even the vision that was cast to how do we maintain the corridors? We have the river that comes through the city. A lot of those things were taken into consideration, and the charrette process of just free hand drawing stuff, it was really special and unique, and it was fun to be a part of at the time. And so, but it set the stage, and things changed, and Nampa could do that, same sort of a thing. I just don't know if the AIA still does that.
Yes, they do.
So are we willing, the question I have is, are we willing to, because I remember in 2002, when I did the National Governors Meeting, worked with Dirk Kempthorne, the discussion at that time was, they hosted the National Governors Meeting in 1985, and the whole discussion was stay out of downtown. They had it out at the Riverside, and they bypassed downtown because of the number of windows that were boarded up in downtown Boise. And that was the discussion in 2002. And you look at when someone said, let's go after it, let's make a plan, and look what happened by 2002. So, which is wonderful to see that change, and then where it's continued to change. The question is, are we willing to do it? Because so like our downtown, I think we're talking about how do we, and it's hard because we don't own those buildings. And I'm curious what, this is an NDC discussion, what CCDC actually purchased versus private ownership, because right now downtown, our biggest pause is the private ownership and nothing's happening to the buildings. But the
State law changes have kind of affected how urban
Affected it.
renewal can be approached anyway. I mean, it's infrastructure now, not buildings. So we can't be building buildings, but we can be putting the improvements in the ground to spur others to come in and take.
You have to have building owners that are willing to do something, but actually where I want to go is North Nampa. North Nampa is in the urban renewal area, and it is an opportunity zone, and we're missing the opportunity because it's almost gone. I don't know how much opportunity is left in that opportunity zone, but we have tremendous opportunity, for lack of a better word, in North Nampa along the Indian Creek pathway to totally revive. And that, I mean, there's such opportunity there, but at some point, when are we as a city gonna stop saying, I mean, basically, and I don't mean to be negative, but it seems like we've been a lot of no, we're not interested, no, but then stuff's happening anyway, but we're not guiding it. And if we don't guide it, we get what we get. And so that's probably my biggest concern for us as a community when I look at it, is changing our mindset from no to this. If, doing nothing is a decision and it's an action, and something happens anyway. And so how do we get out of this place of no to everything to a let's guide our future and let's determine our future and what we're going to look like. And that's what I hope we accomplish here, because even if you do nothing, something's going to happen, and it maybe isn't what we want. So how do we
Keep doing
get
what
to
you've been doing, you're gonna keep getting what you got.
right?
And so I think you have the power to redefine that. And there are a billion barriers to getting there, but that shouldn't be the determinator of your vision.
I have a question for you. So
Yeah, Rick.
you've been hearing us for an hour and a half. I want to hear, what would you change in Nampa?
Well, that's not fair.
Because I know I see you, you're ticking there, so.
Well, I think, the conversation about the Indian Creek is important, because that's an asset that's really irreplaceable. There are probably some strategies that you could actually make some property acquisitions, and you still can buy property through urban renewal. You don't build things, but you can. One of the powerful pieces of the urban renewal legislation is the ability to buy land and write it down. And so while we talk a lot about tax increment revenue proceeds, I think that is an important piece of the puzzle, but that is not the most powerful piece of the urban renewal puzzle. But that's a different story. I think downtown is, I'm going to risk being run out of town, but you asked the question. It's a historic gem. We need to be careful not to make it a museum. We got a lot of flack in Boise for tearing too much stuff down, and we probably did tear too much stuff down. But what the flip side of that negative, and often flip sides of negatives are positives, is there were opportunities to create new buildings that were better suited for use in the current commercial world. The floor plates in the old buildings weren't right for the current office environment. And so there would have been a long time a lot of vacant buildings because they weren't economically designed for the current world. And so the opportunity to build the new buildings, be they 10 stories or now coming 29, basically brought in that population base when it turned to residential that basically made the historic buildings function, because they didn't need the big footprints, the floor plates that the new office environment needs. So there is a balance point of you're not going to have everything be historic. You need some mix of balancing out the new stuff in and around, sensitively installed around the historic fabric, but also looking at the civic infrastructure for downtown. Again, I mentioned earlier, you need some civic place. The other thing, you can see the lynch ropes coming out now. 2nd and 3rd Street is a real problem for downtown. The library being built on a traffic island is a problem. And then there was an opportunity to create kind of a public space, and there probably still could be, if 3rd Street were a two-way street and 2nd Street were more pedestrian-oriented, if you will. So that's kind of a couple of quick thoughts. And those things are not impossible to achieve. But again, it takes some desire to do it and put together a team to make it happen. And I think the other thing one of the factors in the success of downtown Boise was they made it somebody's job. They made it CCDC's job. And it was one step removed from the politics, so we could do stuff that elected officials could never do. Like public art. They went out there and started investing in public art, and the city council would do, we aren't going to do that. But somebody was empowered to do it, and it was their job to do it. And so I think that's an issue, I think, for downtown Nampa, and something that we're talking about, is who's going to be there to bell the cat? Okay, you're here, we'll support you, but we're going to hold you accountable for it. And I don't know what that structure is, but there needs to be staffing around your priorities. Am I still here?
Good comments.
Very good.
Well, in a sense, we do have some of those guardrails in place. The Arts and Historic Preservation Commission is responsible for review of anything first as it comes into the downtown core, so that it at least meets some standards, acceptable standards, if it's a new construction or if it's a facade improvement. I was just in that meeting this week too, and we talked about at the state level, we even in our taxes pay money into an art, in a sense, a fund that's held at that level that we don't get the money back yet to the level that we put in. That maybe there might be some dollars for art, as far as that you were talking about through the CCDC, but at the NDC level, we're less focused on that as we are more focused on the economic opportunities that we can help spur coming in. So it's a broad context of complex issues that when you really get down to it, there's not one single source for an answer. It involves so many, I mean, the network is just vast. As 8 years ago when I got on council, it's like, you gotta be kidding me. There's just way too much information to try to have all at your fingertips in one point. It takes time to learn all that,
So
but
right
we're all
now,
involved in it.
right now, we're, in some ways, we've been trying, and I think for NDC, to correct, because maybe today we wouldn't make the decisions that were made yesterday, right? So then we try to work, we have to work within
What you got?
the cards that we have today. And sometimes those are a little challenging to work with that. And so what I hope that we can identify is how do we work with what we've got today, with the constraints we have today? But then so 8 years from now, if we sunset urban renewal, what does that look like? What opportunities are there? So I hope that NDC will go through an exercise like this to talk about the highest and best use, because we've got 8 years. How do we maximize the 8 years that we have? What does it look like after those 8 years? Is there something we need to be considering that we haven't considered? And I don't know what the answer is, and I'm not suggesting we do that, but I think we need an exercise to really talk about it, because everything that's being done in the urban renewal area becomes the cities. And so really thinking through, what does that look like? What are we going to inherit? What could we be doing? Should we be doing? I think we need to have that discussion too.
And I'll share with you, since this is again, you're just fact-finding at this point. But 8 years ago, well, prior to that even, the Napa Development Corporation chose to spend money on the construction of a new library and parking structure, non-taxable, didn't really create any new jobs. And the Hugh Nichols building, which obviously the law enforcement really appreciated and needed, but again, non-taxable structure. So the costs associated with those areas of growth, or as far as in the downtown area, didn't create any new tax, but just created a tax burden. So the money that was being created on the incremental growth of, the urban renewal area was going just to pay down the bonds for those structures. No new construction was happening that was economically helping our tax base. So all of our money has just been going to pay those bonds down. 2 years ago, we worked hard at refinancing the bonds to be able to pull them into one bond series, paid off one altogether, and saved about $5 million in long-term tax burden. So now we're in a position where we have limited resources to start putting back into the infrastructure improvements, which we did north of the sugar beet factory for an industrial area. So, we're partnering in that. We're looking at areas where we can try to partner, but we have limited resources to work with. So it's not like we can do what CCDC did with downtown Boise, but we're getting to a point where we need to know, or helping to shape the narrative of growth from that limited perspective, but it is limited at this point. I wish we had more money to work with, that we could, do things like this. But again, when I got on city council, urban renewal was just a nasty thing to talk about. People were not appreciative of it because it was just misused. But now I think there's less of a concern about it because of the stewardship aspect of what we've been able to do over the last 8 years.
And I think, wise decision-making on investments there, because I'm big into catalyst investments, that a decision to invest in something, which is a public expenditure of some kind, it should be done in such a manner so that encourages private investment around it. Point to the Grove Plaza. That was built in 1988, $1.6 million out in the middle of 4 gravel parking lots. I mean, tree out there in the middle of the parking lots and all this stuff, people thought that was nuts. Well, that turned out to be an invitation for the private sector to invest around it. And so it's that, it doesn't have to be that scale, but I think as you look at, how to allocate limited remaining resources, how do you get the best bang for your buck? And I think that's, there are ways to do that. You can take your cash and look at how that can be exponentially grown in concert with private investment that basically suits your mission.
So if you look at 18 years from now, again, if we step outside the box, a paradigm, we have a downtown core right now. There's nothing stopping that downtown core from growing, I think, to the west. There's a lot of available property right across the street here. I know that there's been some issues with soil contamination over the years, but from Fred Meyers all the way back to 11th Avenue, that's a big section of ground between 2nd and 3rd that could be potentially developed as well. So again, it's just opportunities. Our opportunity zone, I think, is going away in 5 years, and so that's kind of an incentive for developers to come in to get some tax benefits, but that's on north side of the tracks more so. But anyway, I mean, when you start looking and you start doing your analysis, there's opportunities there on the other side of the rail tracks with the opening up of not only Indian Creek, but maybe Mason Creek, which they kind of come together over there by the overpass on Garrity. So anyway, just throwing some ideas out for you.
Question number 5 is, how do you want to tackle all this stuff? Resignation is not an option. You're stuck, at least through the end of your term. I had a mayor I worked with one time. When he was elected, he went down to the city recorder's office in Oregon and took out a recall petition and signed it, put it in his pocket, and he went around town, and everybody's, when he got cornered in the grocery store, people ragging on him, chewing on his ear, he'd pull out his recall petition, lay it down there with a pen and say, sign it. The deal is you got to agree to step in and take my chair. And nobody ever signed it. And so you're in a unique position to influence the future of Nampa. And how do you want to do that? Sir?
Well, I think Doug knows revenue is a real key. We have a great mayor and a great chief of staff in Rick Hogaboom. And to me, I think we've already began that. You got to influence your state legislators. I mean, we already talked about much earlier. Many things are out of our control. And my strong belief is the local entity needs to make the decisions. And we need to be lobbying, and we have, I think, good state legislatures here in the Nampa area that fight for us. I realize that every community is different and whatever, but I think that's going to be the real key is we need to spend our time and probably some dollars in influencing that so revenue can flow back in so people like this can make the proper decisions. Because you can say, I want this, I want that, I want that, but guess what? Price, some people are not going to be able to travel to Boise anymore because of the price of gas. You don't have a choice. Well, they didn't decide to have the gas go up $3 to $3.50, a gallon. So, that's the thing. So whatever influence we have, which I think Nampa now does have influence and have capable people of influencing those folks. But
You might not control, but you're not without influence.
yeah, so I am. We can paint the old picture, and we need to do that. I'm not saying we don't do that, but you still have to have the revenue, and so on, and the decision making to be able to go in the direction that we want to go in.
So with that, I think one thing that I would like to suggest that we tackle in keeping with that is that we agree with Tom's leadership to tackle the change in the statute regarding the highway district funding. Right now, the allocation of funding within the highway districts, it's a 50-50 split. It's the very reason ACHD was formed, was because once a city, right now I believe at 60%, the city of Nampa collects 60% of the taxes that go into the Highway District 1. We get about 40% of that back. Our citizens that are complaining about taxes are paying to repair roads outside of the city limits of Nampa. They shouldn't be doing that. We don't have the funding, so like with our citizens and our surveys, we all know this. The number one issue, it's changed from public safety to transportation and streets. So if that is the number one problem, and as you said it earlier, we've got to be able to get around town, right? So I think we have a couple of things. One is, and number one is transportation. And so it would be this council saying, yes, we're going to support Tom to go after a legislative change this fall. We need to go ahead and write the legislation and get somebody to carry it. I think that's something that I would say that's a number one thing, because we don't have the funding to do what we need to do. Tom is influencing the legislature and really working to get them to change the highway distribution formula, which has sat there, I mean, it's the first time in how many years that they've considered it? 30 years that, and they haven't even considered it. And so because of his advocacy and working with, across the state of Idaho, they've been considering it, which is, as long as they don't rescind on it, it will really help us in our streets funding, because funding is critical. So that's one thing I would suggest that we do, is on the advocacy side. And then the other one, which is legislative, I think we need to strongly decide that we're going to advocate for the index to be reinstated, homeowners exemption, so that because we've got so much residential here, and that's the other thing that's really, really hurting our residents. The finger gets pointed to the cities because of our budget, but the increase in a budget is minimal. It's just minimal compared to the impact that this, that lack of indexing has had with our homeowners. So those are two things, I mean, that I think that we really, I would recommend that we as a city council say we're going to get behind and we're going to advocate for a change in funding.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor. Yesterday, I had a meeting with one of the legislators who don't even live here. They live in eastern Idaho. And I said, don't tell me how to change Nampa. Tell me how you can help me change Nampa. He had this confused look on his face, and he goes, well, I don't know how to do that. I said, but your statutes and your laws you're passing is prohibiting us from changing Nampa. And he went, oh, yeah. And that's the attitude.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, because we know what a Dillon rule state is. There are home rule states and there are Dillon rule states, and the Dillon rule states are those that have only those powers that are granted by the legislature. Idaho is the most Dillon of all Dillon rule states. So in terms of the ability to do stuff, it's all determined, almost all, well, actually all of it, is determined in that round building in downtown Boise. And so recognizing the path to your success goes through that building. I think an effective presence there, both through Association of Idaho Cities and through your own horsepower, and that probably includes some of your own time, is I think a critical factor in how you tackle this stuff, because car washes and bake sales ain't going to do it.
From a council perspective, what I would try to encourage us as 6 council members is to really be positive ambassadors for our city. It's important that we're a team, we speak as a team, we work together. I think that's the old coach in me as well. You're not going to accomplish much if you're just out there to do your own thing. We need to be unified in that effort, be positive in our delivery of who we are as a city. Because it's easy to get negative if someone's talking to you negatively. Oh, yeah, whatever. But if you're positive, that's just, again, it's more of a behavioral type of an approach to talking to people. So I would just encourage us to remember that we're ambassadors first for the city. That's what we are elected to do, is serve others. And so our servant approach to leadership should be number one. It's not about one person, it's about the collective. And it's tough to do that sometimes, because you get focused on, especially from a male's perspective, I just got to get a task done. I want to get it done. So anyway, I just encourage us as a council to stay unified in our approach and the vision that we try to create.
I appreciate those comments. I have a question, though. How do we get from here to tangible, actionable items? Because what I'm thinking is, well, let's look at this. What are the city's key assets that will help to ensure a positive future for its residents? Because as we look to the future for something actionable, like, do we want to tackle North Nampa? We have limited funding. How do we allocate the funding that we have to get the greatest return, right, on whatever that is, especially in grants? We did go after an amazing grant for the North Nampa, for the bridge for the design. And then hopefully, while there's still infrastructure funds, maybe we could get some funding for actual work in that North Nampa area. But I guess, how do we get to, what are our highest priorities that we need to be tackling now? So that would be a question and how do we get there?
And I think that's what hopefully this exercise is going to inform. You know, I've gone through much of your planning documents, your budget narratives, goals and objectives and so forth, and tried to synthesize them in a different way than they're kind of stuck in silos now, in terms of kind of raising up to 30,000 feet and understanding the connections between the leg bone and the ankle bone. And how do we kind of empower that connection rather than basically follow them down the silo. And so while I don't have the answer today, I think that is what the mayor's asked us to do, is figure out a way to simply articulate these things we're trying to achieve and develop a framework that basically builds the cat, who's going to be in charge of this, and who needs to be in support of it, what resources do we need to make it happen, and then have a periodic conversation with this group about how we doing. And we're not going to be 100% successful, but if we can get the 50-yard line, that's better than being on your own 30. And so I think if you can kind of bear with me as we work through this process, I'm hopeful that we get down to the other end of this and you're feeling more empowered in how you are controlling goal achievement here than just throw it up and say, hope that it's going to come down in a positive place. Okay. After this? Okay. Well,
And we have 5 minutes.
we're running out of time. Okay. This is what you said you wanted. Is that something you want to revisit? Or is that something that you're happy with?
We spent a lot of time creating that, the statements 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago.
Actually, it was when I came in, it was before I came in, because this is the original vision and mission.
Yeah.
The values and the focus areas are new. And we did that about 4 years ago. But then the vision and mission. But it's a good question, do we want to stay here? Is it guiding us?
I think it still speaks to who we are, wanting to have a live, work, play, worship opportunity. That's what we focused on. I remember working with Bruce and just in the wording. We had an attorney that was a part of our council, and so words mean things. So we wanted to
Absolutely.
make sure
They
that-
charge by them.
Yeah, so anyway, I know we spent a lot of time in trying to craft this so that it made sense and reflected who we are as a community. And I think, again, back to Jacob's point, we want to maintain that unique identity, and that's, I think, what we're speaking to up here. And if our focus is on that instead of other things, I wouldn't want us to get caught back on that rabbit of chasing, this thing again, knowing that we have bigger issues to try to deal with.
The only thing I struggle with is like in the vision statement, a vision statement for me casts vision. Now, the second sentence, because I love it, that Nampa is a caring community where people live, work, play, and worship and raise their families. The only thing I think is that it says who we are, but it doesn't cast our vision. Now, the second sentence is and maybe it's just the way it's worded, that we're a place of economic opportunity with an independent spirit. So it's kind of saying who we are, but it isn't casting the vision for where we want to go. So, but maybe it's just a matter of wording. And then I have to say, out of all of this, the statement I use is that we're a safe and healthy community. We want to be a safe and healthy community where people prosper because I can remember it. One of the challenges with a mission and vision statement that's too long, if we can't remember it and use it all the time, it's hard to actually enact it, right? I mean, it's because it isn't that often that we go back to that. But for me, my guiding principle, I want to be a safe and healthy community where people prosper. So are we doing that? Because this is very, very wordy. I like it principally, and I agree with every bit of it. It's just, it's wordy.
Well, it's more of a value statement instead of a vision statement.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, you can just change the words around and kind of pick up on the theme. But I think you're right. It's more of a value statement of who we are and what we value.
And maybe that's what we should say, is what do we value? Versus a vision statement, and then maybe the vision statement is the simplicity of Nampa. Our vision is to be a safe and healthy community where people prosper. Maybe that is the vision statement. Well, how do you get there, right? How do you get there? I don't know. I don't want to oversimplify it, but I agree with you. It's a good value statement. And I don't think we should I'm not suggesting we depart from it, because I appreciate the value statement of it. Or we just leave it all right where it is and we're fine.
I guess from my perspective, what I'd beg your indulgence for is working on the focus areas somewhat, because I think having not a huge number of them, but those are a little bit cumbersome. Secure, obvious, safety is a big issue, economic opportunity, infrastructure seems to be supporting of all those other things. So if I can have your leave to kind of restructure those a bit, that would be good. The values, it's good you start out with integrity. That's probably a good thing to underpin yourself with. Stewardship, as you indicated, this isn't your business. This is the business of 100,000 people out there, and you're just here in stewardship of it. And then, as we're talking about getting along together today, teamwork is important. Innovation has come up, and that might be something we want to tweak a little bit. So if we can play with this a little bit, I don't see any wholesale get together and spend 6 weeks trying to redo this thing. If we can, from what we've heard here, make any suggestions, you're free to throw them out, as you're free to throw us out.
I like the innovation, and one thought would be, and I'll just throw this out for whatever it's worth, because I probably influenced teamwork in there, but maybe the word collaboration is a better word, because teamwork speaks more internally. I mean, it is external, but the word collaboration may be a better external word, that we value collaboration, which applies to internally and externally.
If we're going to explore partnerships, I think, collaboration is inherent in that. It's 9 o'clock.
Just one last thing on focus areas. So really, those focus areas came from our citizen surveys that we had gotten, that what they were telling us was important, and they're still telling us the same thing, right?
Yeah, we're not seeing a wide departure from that, but just maybe a little bit of redefinition.
No, and I appreciate that a lot. I mean, I'm totally open to that. Council, are you open? Are you guys open to that?
Yeah, to borrow one of Darrell's statements, he says a lot, is we don't want to be like Boise. Boise's Boise, we're Nampa. So it's not like we're trying to emulate anybody else, but if we can learn from mistakes that have happened or learn by positive things that they've been able to shape in any community, I think we're very much open to that, but we're unique.
Absolutely.
So am I hearing the consensus on vision and mission, and to really kind of stay where we are with no significant relook at it, and then maybe look at the wording, let Phil take a look at possibly a couple word changes on values or adding, and then coming back with something, and then on the areas of focus? All right, is everybody okay with?
As long as it doesn't take away from your.
Can you go back to it?
Can go back to that, the slide, that.
What we're needing help with is kind of casting that vision. And, we've got some statements that we've made, and we can tweak those things. But I think for your time, if you can provide us with some unique ideas, some out-of-the-box thinking. I think that's what the value you can bring to us as an outside third-party resource coming in to help us shape something that maybe we hadn't thought of, or enforce something that we have been thinking about, so we can move forward on that. Is that,
It's been noted that I don't understand that there is a box.
there's no box?
There is no box. So you don't have, there's no box to think outside of.
And I'll just say, I have no problem with tweaking the wording. To me, vision and mission are action statements. Vision that we have up there is wonderful, but it's not action. You can even put verbs or whatever you want into it. And as far as your top part, Mayor, Nampa's committed to being a safe, healthy community where people prosper, I mean, I would have no problem with that being our succinct vision statement or whatever we want to call it. Yeah.
Better get a legal advice on it, too.
He's state representative now. He's not.
Mayor,
Okay.
can I make a very quick budget-related comment, just very quick? Okay. Councilors, we are on track to complete the budget book for delivery by end of day, Monday, June 27th. We should have that both in soft copy on a zip drive and a hard copy in a book. That'll be available at the end of the day, Monday. We'll have it here for you to come pick up in the office. Sometime after our meeting is on the 11th, and I'm going to try and set up meetings with you in groups of 3 between the 5th and the 8th and 9th, and outline just the basic broad strokes of what built the budget. So look for some meeting invitations on there, and we'll work back and forth with my admin, but we're on track to get you the budget book a full 2 weeks, so for you to enjoy a bit of light reading.
And if you happen to not be available, because we strongly encourage you to have a meeting with Doug, and our understanding from legal is that we can meet in groups of 3 because it is not a quorum. And so it really helps from a time-saving standpoint for Doug to go ahead, I mean, if it needs to be 2s, but to meet with the groups of 3. So we will reach out, but then also if you guys want to meet with Tom in Public Works, I think Tom stepped out, or I think many have already reached out with Chief Huff, you're welcome to schedule meetings with the staff. But that first week when you get the book, it'll give you an opportunity to really read it and get your questions formulated. And then that next week, I'm going to ask staff to be available to just meet with you and resolve any questions you've got. Are you good? Are you guys okay with that? Oh, there you go. So this side gets to meet and that side, oh.
You think you're the cool kids, or what?
I got sad news for you, Darrell. Doug already said he's gonna buy 3 of us steak dinner.
Okay.
Excuse me, go ahead.
In conclusion, the mayor has applied the lash and expecting this to be back in final form to you by Labor Day. And so it's a sporty course, I will recognize, but we're already working on it. And so your input today has been absolutely critical in making sure we get in the right quadrant here. And so that's kind of the next steps that we're going to be going through. So we'll be working kind of iteratively with the city staff and occasional check-in with you guys. And so we're on overtime, I understand that. But I do appreciate your time and your commitment to the conversation, because we know you're all bashful and you can't be encouraged to speak at any time, but you've overcome that well today. And so I think we've learned a lot, and hopefully when it comes back, you can recognize some of the stuff you've said here.
The next opportunity for us to review what you've been able to accomplish, is that the 29th of July, or is it the 15th?
18th of August.
Well, we'll send stuff to
We'll-
you in the meantime, and we may schedule a meeting. We may need to schedule a meeting, but what we did say was that the preliminary, the draft, getting towards final draft, the special council meeting on the 18th of August, we will come back and refocus. And if we want to actually be part of the special council meeting in July, that we could use half of that meeting possibly to come back and for the next, to say this is what we're giving. So if you're available, we might do that. Would you guys prefer
Preliminary,
that?
the preliminary draft to the city would be to the city council or to city staff and yourself?
Well, I think we should give it to everybody. It's just available.
Yeah, our goal was to get it to city staff with what process they want to define in terms of creating a city response. We'll accommodate whatever is needed.
I think it would be prudent to allow us to have at least a review of the preliminary draft. Otherwise, we're hit cold in the face with it on the 18th. And
Well, the 18th is not the final. The 18th is getting closer. The final will be in September. So that 18th is a time, but we'll get it to you before then. We'll get back to the council.
Yeah, we don't want any surprises here,
No.
and you don't want them either, so,
well, and the benefit of our thoughts, I think, would be helpful to
absolutely.
you.
Because you obviously have some.
Oh, yeah. Especially Dale. He keeps them to himself.
Okay, so if thank you so much, and I'm going to stand for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
All in favor? Thank you.